Hello, I'm Ed Fuquay, young adult librarian extraordinaire here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
Solitaire Frisbee from the Children's Room.
We're continuing our talk about Norse mythology. We're getting into familiar territory today. After talking about Odin last week, this week I want to talk about the most famous members of the Norse pantheon, which is Thor and Loki.
All right.
Which everyone has at least heard of, partly through Marvel Comics and now the movies and everything.
I would think.
If you search Thor, you mostly get references to the films now instead of Norse mythology, which in some ways makes me sad. In other ways, though, the Marvel Comics versions are very interesting interpretations.
Well, they can also be introductions, gateways to, for someone to go back into that research.
They were for me. They got me interested, a lifelong interest in mythology in general, and Norse mythology in particular. So it's very educational. However, the Norse gods from mythology are very different than the Norse gods from the comic books and the movies. Thor in mythology is a big guy with long red hair and a beard.
Oh,
yep.
Okay.
He always has red hair. He's quick-tempered and not terribly bright. He's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. His father is Odin, the All-Father. So he's the son of the head of Asgard. Now Odin is married to Frigga and Freya, probably separately or together. However, neither of them is Thor's mother. Yeah, I'm not sure the Norse were very big on monogamy in those days. So Thor's mother is described frequently as being Jiro or Jorah, which is a Norse word meaning the earth.
I don't know how to interpret that.
Yeah, well, when Mark Ruinold is doing a flashback to Thor's origin, he simply has Odin joining up with Gaia, literally Mother Earth. Yeah.
I'm at a loss.
Yep. Well, this is Marvel's excuse for why Thor is so obsessed with defending the Earth from supervillains and things like that, because protecting the Earth is literally in his blood. His mother was the Earth itself.
Okay. I mean, it's cool.
Yeah.
I like it. I don't understand the mechanics of it all, but
it's an intriguing concept. Yeah.
Been met with some challenging the one cloth in the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So stranger things have happened.
Obviously. However, in recent, that's been retconned. So apparently in a recent story, which I haven't read, but I read articles about it because it made headlines on the news sites that I go to, they've recently rewritten Thor's origin so that his actual mother is the Phoenix Force of X-Men fame. So I have no idea what that means or what it implies for Thor.
That I need to process. Can you say it one more time?
His mother is the Phoenix Force of X-Men fame.
According to whom?
According to a recent issue of Avengers, I think number 42 that just came out last week or this week.
Did they just in this instant decide it, or is there anything that actually goes back throughout comic book history that would suggest?
They're just making it up.
Okay.
They've added a group of proto-Avengers who were active during the Stone Age, one of whom was Odin, and one of whom was a Cro-Magnon who had the Phoenix Force inside of her. The Phoenix Force is a sort of sentient energy field in Marvel Comics that manifests inside of different women. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they can control the Phoenix Force, and sometimes the Phoenix Force controls them. The most famous wielder of the Phoenix in recent times is, of course, Jean Grey of the X-Men. Mm-hmm. Whose life ends tragically or heroically, depending on which continuity you're going with. So that's Thor.
I would have thought that was super cool if they had actually created that way back when, as an afterthought. I'm not sure. What do you think of it as an afterthought?
I'm not sure exactly what it implies about the character. Having Mother Earth be his mother seems to make sense in that he has such strong ties to our world. The Phoenix Force is a cosmic entity that's neither good nor evil. And he's certainly never seen any signs that he manifests any of that kind of power levels. So I'm up in the air right now. I have to go back and read the entire storyline to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
So Thor in mythology, he drives around a chariot which is pulled by two goats. It's a goat cart. However, they're magic goats. So at night when he's hungry, he can kill the goats and eat them. And then tie up all the bones inside their skin, and the next morning they'll be fine again.
Like the guy where the birds peck at his face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the goats are fine the next morning. They're apparently okay with this arrangement. So, yeah.
Is there a parallel there between the two stories?
Probably at some point. Things that magically come back to life after being eaten occurs in 2 or 3 different mythologies. I think we'll see it again in Greek mythology. It's the idea of he's also a fertility god, among other things.
You said the goats are okay with it. Is
Yeah.
this not a curse for them?
Apparently not. They seem fine with it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Rick Riordan dealt with that. He had the goat suffering from kind of a Stockholm syndrome sort of thing. So, Thor is considered, he's a god of strength. He's a god of lightning and thunder and storms in general.
Mm-hmm. Also
fertility. Thor's hammer, his most famous artifact, is his famous hammer, which is itself a sort of a phallic symbol. The hammer Mjolnir, a small image of it was made into necklaces that people wore around their necks, and you can buy those in a lot of jewelry places today. Certainly a lot of New Age shops and things like that. Apparently the way it worked, and they found them actual ones on bodies that had died.
Wow.
So we know it was something people actually wore. And from the first-person accounts that we had, if you're at sea and a storm came up, you would reach up and grab the hammer around your neck and say a brief word to Thor to remind him of how cool you were and how you don't deserve to drown at sea. In 1300, there was someone who was talking to a chronicler, and he explained to a visitor that on land he worshipped Jesus, but at sea he still has his Thor medallion around his neck, just in case a storm comes up. He wants to cover his bets. Thursday is named after him.
Right.
So he has a tremendous impact even in our world today.
Mm-hmm.
His hammer is Mjolnir, which is one of those words that's spelled with not nearly enough vowels in it.
Mm-hmm.
He has a belt of strength that doubles his already prodigious strength. And he has iron gloves that also make him wield all of his magic weapons.
So if he's not wearing the belts,
He's still really strong.
but only half.
Yeah, the belt makes him extra strong. The belt really seems to be like gilding the lily, kind of, but it's a part of his background.
Do we know the origin of the belt?
I don't think so. It doesn't really have an origin.
Okay.
A lot of things do, but I haven't found one for that yet.
All right. How did he come by the hammer?
I will tell you that.
Okay.
I'll tell you that very shortly. That's coming. He is married to the lovely golden-haired Sif. She doesn't show a lot of personality in the myths. As there are so many myths in which there's a strong, dominant male character, the females kind of fade into the background. Sif doesn't show much personality. She loves Thor. She's faithful. She's incredibly beautiful. She has eyes as blue as the sky, and hair the color of corn silk, and that kind of thing. He also has a mistress, of course, because he's a Viking. He has a romantic relationship, or at least a physical relationship, with Jarn Saxa, or Yarn Saxa, I guess, because you don't pronounce J's. So Yarn Saxa is a Jotun giantess who is also Thor's mistress. I think Yarn Saxa would also make a good name for a heavy metal band. Her name translates as Iron Dagger. So yeah, Thor and Iron Dagger got together, and they have a couple of kids of their own.
I'm gonna leave that one alone.
Yeah. So that's Thor, basically. You find images of Thor all over the place in archaeology and things like that. Any figure holding a hammer is always Thor. Sometimes they just draw the hammer. They don't have to bother to carve Thor into the stone.
You said she was a giant.
Jarn Saxa was a giantess, yes.
But he's not, right?
No. I think the Norse kind of fudged on the exact definition of giant. Because Loki, whom we'll get to in a minute, is also a giant. He was born and raised a giant.
Loki?
Loki, yeah. But he's no taller or shorter than anybody else in Asgard.
Right.
So I don't know how it works. A part of it is the fact that the females of these monster races are always very sexy.
Is it a reference to a different quality, or just is it not associated necessarily with size?
it's obviously not that associated with size. It may reflect a time period that the giants were like another tribe that the Vikings had to overcome, and they're remembered as being savage brutes who were like 10 foot tall, and they probably really weren't.
Oh, okay.
But it's the exact same thing you see with the Fomori in Celtic mythology. We're also a race of huge monsters, except the women were really hot and normal sized.
Right.
It's mythical biology. So that is Thor, and then we come to Loki, who's definitely one of the most famous of the Norse gods. He's the son of a giant named Laufey. Technically, his full name is Loki Laufeyson. His origin is kind of murky. For one thing, for a character who appears in so many myths, there's a shadowy quality about him. We get vivid descriptions of Thor's like long red hair and bristling red beard in several myths. Loki isn't physically described ever. He's just Loki.
Could that be an indication that he was actually more popular than Thor?
Well, it's possible. He was a shapeshifter, so it's possible no one just really knew what he looked like. Now, his origin is also kind of mysterious. Supposedly, Odin took him in and made him a blood brother. I think they shared, they pricked each other's thumbs and shared blood like that, which made Loki, officially a member of the Aesir, an Asgardian.
Okay, I was thinking that they were brothers, and I was like, okay, so maybe they have the same mom then, but no.
Well, Loki is an adopted son, although he was Odin's blood brother, according to the myths. Marvel Comics plays on the idea of the sibling rivalry a lot, with Loki and Thor being brothers. That's a major part of their version of Norse mythology. And although you don't see that as strongly in the actual myths themselves, it's obvious that Loki and Thor have a real love-hate relationship.
Okay.
They both hate each other and yet can't leave each other alone. It's a very unhealthy relationship for both of them, probably in the long run. But the idea that Loki and Thor are brothers does not violate Norse mythology. It's just that wasn't really stressed. But when you see the two of them in action, they do look like feuding brothers a lot. Loki is a shapeshifter. He is the trickster god of Norse mythology. One of the reasons why he's so popular. He's the smart one. The one who's too smart for the room, or at least he always thinks he is. He follows in a long line from the Monkey King to Coyote and so forth.
Right.
But tricksters who do nothing but cause trouble and get into trouble and then cleverly get out of trouble most of the time. There's a belief that he may have been a god of fire. That is on more shaky ground. It was Jacob Grimm of the Brothers Grimm fame who deduced that from his reading of Teutonic mythology. And he is associated with fire in some of the myths, but most of them he has no connection with fire at all.
Well, it's funny that he's associated with fire in the places that he is, because I was thinking if Thor was in fact birthed via the mother, it's like maybe he came out of a volcano.
Yeah. There is also a belief that if Odin suddenly brought him to Asgard and adopted him for no reason, that he could be one of Odin's offspring. Odin was very prolific. Right. So it is possible that he and Thor are half-brothers.
Yeah.
And again, the Norse myths don't say that, but they don't say it's not true either. Loki, that we today would call gender fluid. He can change into male or female, and he seems pretty comfortable operating as both. In the comic books, he went through a lengthy stretch of time, like several years, in which he was a woman.
Would we recognize the character?
He still had the same, cunning personality. He just became like a really attractive woman. In the comic books, the Asgardians had all been killed, quote, killed, and they came back to life by manifesting bodies of various mortals. And he happened to come back in a female form, he said. It was yet another trick of Loki's.
It's cool.
Yeah. In the Magnus Chase books by Rick Riordan, he introduces one of the characters who's an offspring of Loki called Alex Ferrero, who is indeed gender fluid. In the book, shifting back and forth from male to female.
Interesting.
So it's a little bit of representation for that kind of thing. Now, Loki had a wife who was a giantess. Her name was Angrboda. The band names just keep coming. Angrboda was Loki's wife. she's kind of an interesting character. We don't know nearly enough about her. She was a giant, yet another beautiful giantess. They produced many children, none of whom were quite human. I mean, bearing in mind that Loki was a shapeshifter, and who knows what Angrboda was into. So
I was like, why would they be human?
Exactly. So the three offspring of Loki that we know of are Hela, the goddess of death. She is Loki's daughter in actual mythology, and she would later go on to rule Helheim, where the unworthy dead go in the afterlife. Angrboda also gave birth to Fenris, the evil wolf, who will be released from his bonds and devour the sun at Ragnarok. And she gave birth to Jormungandr. Now, Jormungandr is the world serpent, a snake so large he stretches around the entire earth. And it's prophesied at Ragnarok it is Jormungandr who will kill Thor. So Loki is the father of the monster that will kill Thor at Ragnarok.
Interesting.
Yeah, and Odin knows all this. After sacrificing his eye and hanging from the world tree for 9 days, he figured out how Ragnarok was going to occur and knows that all this is going to happen.
Have these qualities, Marvel hasn't touched on these particular ideas, have they?
Not that much. They've made Hela a separate goddess unrelated to Loki. She's just another goddess in the comic books. She's different. She's a child of Odin in the movie, I believe, the Cate Blanchett version of the character. Which kind of took away a little bit of Ragnarok for me, but
Yeah.
I'm a purist.
Why?
I don't know.
Why deviate?
They were coming up with a different view of the Asgardian gods because they kept wanting to find a way to make Thor more popular. And so they recast the roles that they had. The Valkyries, instead of being the choosers of the dead, were basically like Odin's special forces branch that he sent out on secret missions. Yeah.
Meh.
I didn't think all the ideas worked, but the Thor Ragnarok is still a cool movie. But there's a lot of powerful stuff in the Norse myths. One of the reasons why they've been told and retold over all these years.
Right.
The fact that Loki is the father of all the things that will destroy the earth and be the doom of the gods. And that the Asgardians know this, and he still lives with them in Asgard. He does, I mean, he finally goes too far. He does get captured at one point and chained up. But he will, of course, break his bonds at the end of the world.
But I mean, does that make him intrinsically bad?
That's the question. Also, if you're fated to do something, is it your fault?
And it would, their world would end. It talks about it ending, but does it say why? What brings it to an end?
It just happens. I believe they thought in terms of cycles, like the Aztecs had the different suns. The Norse people felt the same way.
So if that were the case, I could see it. I could see them not seeing him in a bad light. Like, it's just, that's your job, is to bring it to a conclusion.
And I had made the comment about the idea of Odin hanging himself from the tree and comparing it to the crucifixion of Jesus last week. And in some ways, you can look at Loki as being the Judas of the story. And that he's right there with all the other disciples, but he's the one who's going to betray Jesus. And, and the musical Jesus Christ Superstar makes it pretty clear Jesus knows it's going to happen.
Right.
How could he not know?
Right. Yeah, no, on all accounts, as far as I've read.
Yeah. So it's an interesting concept, and that might have been somewhat influenced by Christianity, which had reached them by the time these things were written down. But many of these myths are so ancient, they have a very pre-Christian feeling to them. A giant giving birth to snakes and wolves, it doesn't come from a Christian background at all.
Well, as soon as you said evil wolf, I was like, nope, there's no such thing.
It's a bad wolf.
They're not evil.
It's a bad... No, Fenrir was a bad wolf. So the story of how Thor got his hammer is a great example of seeing Loki and Thor a little bit in action.
Okay.
Because as usual, it's all Loki's fault. So Thor has his beautiful wife, Sif. And one morning he wakes up and Sif's lovely blonde hair is gone. Her head has been shaved during the night, and the hair has just vanished, and she's totally bald as an egg. And so he immediately shouts, "Loki, what have you done?" So he tracks down Loki, who first protests his innocence, but Thor doesn't buy it for a minute. And finally, Loki says, "I thought it would be funny." So Thor explains to him how unfunny it is, in no uncertain terms.
What were those terms?
Well, in the Neil Gaiman version of it, he has Thor threaten to break every single bone in Loki's body. And then since Loki's a god who will heal, he'll come back the next day and do it again. Every single day till the end of time. So Loki says, "I can fix this. I can make this go away, don't worry." And then he says the most dangerous thing of all, "Trust me."
Oh boy.
So Thor's like, "All right." So Loki fortunately knows exactly what to do. Now the dwarves are the master craftsmen. They're the smiths. Dwarves can make anything, and virtually everything they make is magic. So he wanders down to Svartalheim, where the dwarves live. And so he's wandering around looking lonely and dejected, and he runs across the sons of Ivaldi, who are the most prominent of all of the craftsmen amongst the dwarves. And so they ask him, what's wrong? And he says, "Well, I need something constructed, but I'm not sure it can really be done." So the sons of Ivaldi all perk up and say, "Really? What is it?" He's like, "Well, I need to make golden hair, actual hair of gold, that I can plant in a woman's scalp and it will grow there just like real hair." "But it's impossible. No one could possibly make that." And the sons of Ivaldi huddle together like, "Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, it can be done." So Loki says, "Well, it turns out the gods of Asgard are having a contest to see who is the greatest craftsman in the world. And if you could make golden hair, maybe 2 or 3 other things, we could present them to the gods. And then if you win, then they'll proclaim you as the greatest craftsman in all the 9 realms." So this sounds like a pretty good deal to the sons of Ivaldi. So they start right away hammering and chiseling, and they grab a brick of gold and they stretch it out really super thin, because gold, of course, is so ductile it can be stretched to something as thin as a human hair. And so sure enough, they make a golden wig, a wig of golden hair, and they made 2 other things. And so Loki arranges for them to come to Asgard, but of course, Loki being Loki, can't leave well enough alone. So before he leaves, he runs across another couple of dwarves. Their names are Brock and his brother Eitri. Now they're also extremely good craftsmen, highly talented. And so they say to him, "Oh, by the way, we're having a contest in Asgard. Who can be the greatest craftsman?" But they might as well just award it to the sons of Ivaldi, because they're guaranteed to win. And so, of course, Brock and Eitri immediately perk up and say, "Oh no, they're hacks. The sons of Eitri, forget them. We can craft much better than them." So Loki says, "Well, that would be wonderful." And so they said, "We'll go to work on it." However, they've heard about Loki. So they immediately suspect they're being tricked somehow. So Brock and Eitri say, "But when we win, we'll take your head with us." And Loki's like, "Okay, well, I don't want to lose out on all this cool stuff I'm about to get." So Loki says, "It's a deal." Because let's face it, he's Loki. He's really going to get outwitted by a bunch of dwarves. So they start crafting too. And Loki watches them and thinks, they're really good. So he realizes, I have to do something. So he tries to sabotage the final thing they're working on, which they refer to as their masterpiece, the greatest thing that has ever been forged since the dawn of time. So they have one person, Brock is working the bellows, and Eitri is pounding away at the forge. And they're making a lump of iron into something just spectacular looking. Technically, it's made out of uru, which is a magical metal of the dwarves. Only dwarves know how to work.
Okay.
So they're hammering out this thing out of uru. Mm-hmm. So Loki changes into a horsefly, and he flies over to Brock, who's pumping away at the bellows, and starts biting him. And so Brock ignores it, because he can't have the heat go down even for a second. It'll ruin the casting. And so Loki gets so desperate, he flies up right between Brock's eyes and gives him a great big bite there. And Brock finally lets go of the bellows and tries to smack Loki, and Loki barely escapes with his life. He goes back to pumping the bellows again. Eitri says, "Well, it's not as good as it could be. I lost the heat for a few seconds there." He was trying to craft a warhammer, and a warhammer is pretty big. It has a long handle so you can swing it like an axe, basically. But the handle came out too short. So still, it looks nice. We have 2 other really cool things, so we'll take this to Asgard and see what they say. So, the big day arrives. You've got Frey and Odin and Thor who are being the judges.
Mm-hmm.
So Loki introduces the contestants. The sons of Valdi go first. And the first thing they produce is this lovely golden hair, which they describe. You can put it on a woman's head and it'll grow, be just like real hair. And Thor says, well, we'll see about that. So immediately he summons Sif. And the wig is draped over her head. It immediately takes root. And she tosses her hair back, and it's just like real hair. She goes right away outside to see it sparkle in the sun and show off to all of her friends. So, and then the next thing the sons of Ivaldi build, they pull out something that looks kind of like a folded up piece of cloth, like a tarp. And then, Odin says, well, that's not very impressive. He says, but wait and see. This is a Skidbladnir. Skidbladnir is the greatest boat that's ever been built. And so he unfolds the cloth, and it folds into a full-size longboat. Like it's a giant longboat that can hold 100 men.
From a cloth?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's how cunning they are. It's all in how you fold it. As long as you remember where the creases are. It's like a road map, if you ever remember those. Yeah. So Skidbladnir it'll always get a fair wind. Uh-huh. It can take you anywhere. Huge, giant boat. You fold it up in a piece of cloth, stick it in your pocket, and Frey says, oh yeah, I want that. And so they award that to him. And then the third thing that they've made is the magic spear Gungnir. So Gungnir is a spear which, when you throw it, it will always hit its target. Now, Odin right away is interested in that, because since he lost an eye, he has no depth perception. So a spear that always hits his target sounds pretty fine to him. So it's unbreakable, of course. And an oath sworn on Gungnir has to be upheld. It is an unbreakable oath.
Okay.
And so Odin took that for himself, and that became his signature weapon.
I was thinking, I didn't recall Thor having it, so he wouldn't have.
This is Odin's spear,
okay.
Gungnir. So that's what the sons of Ivaldi brought. And so Loki's pretty confident that Brock and Eitri aren't going to win after seeing all that stuff. So they come out, and the first thing that Brock and Eitri have made, they open up a sack, and out comes a metallic golden boar. It's Gullinbursti. It's a boar made of gold that shines like the sun. It'll run tirelessly. And so Frey wants that hooked up to his chariot. So now he has a magic solid gold boar that'll take him places. Shines like the sun. Beautiful thing. So the next thing they produce is a arm ring, like an armband. And they say this is called Dropnir. And Odin says, that means dripping. That doesn't sound very impressive. He says, but wait. And so he holds Dropnir up and he shakes it. And 9 rings exactly like it fall to the ground. He says, every 9 days you can do this, and you'll have 9 more identical gold rings. So Odin likes that and takes it for himself. He immediately puts it around his arm. Although he later gives it to Freya, though. She likes shiny things. So the last thing they come out with, and we have this. It's a warhammer. I know the handle is short. On the other hand, if you throw it, it always comes back to you. And it's unbreakable. Can't be damaged. Completely invulnerable. And Thor's like, I could use something like that. Thinks, I break things all the time when I hit them with a weapon. So with the hammer, I can hit whatever I want and it won't break. And I'll never miss. That's great. So he immediately grabs the hammer and starts playing with it and whirling it over his head and everything. And Loki's like, oh no. He's like, Thor, have you forgotten Sif's lovely hair the sons of Ivaldi brought you? I mean, you can't possibly compare a hammer to something like your wife's hair. And Thor goes, hey, I can hurl lightning bolts with it. Boom. So he immediately practices like hurling it and catching it again when it comes back to him. And Loki's like, big picture here. Look, Frey has this awesome magic boat that folds up, and Odin's got this wicked cool spear. And Thor exclaims, this is the greatest weapon that has ever been made. Surely Brock and Eitri are the winners of the competition. And Frey and Odin, of course, agree. So Brock comes up with a great big axe and says, all right, Loki, I'll take your head back with us. I'm sure we can do something with it. We'll make it into, an ashtray or something. And he's like, all right, you can have my head. I did agree to that. Although, you can't have my neck. I didn't say anything about my neck. You can't touch my neck. So they're like, okay, I can't decapitate you. Fine. So he pulls out a knife and runs up and starts to stab Loki in the face. But it doesn't work. He says, did I forget to mention I've taken a potion that makes me invulnerable to knives and swords? Sorry, I didn't forgot to bring that up. You're like, okay, that's fine. No knives, no swords, no axes. So he goes into his toolkit and he pulls out an awl for leather working. And he comes over with a long, like, strip of rawhide in this awl. And he runs up and he jams the awl through Loki's lips. And he sews Loki's lips together.
Okay.
And then cuts it off. And of course it's magic, so Loki can't get free, like, instantly. So Loki is sitting there, everybody's kind of laughing at him because his famous mouth is sealed shut now.
Uh-huh.
So Brock and Treachery won the competition. Loki was humiliated. However, Thor got his hammer. That's the origin of Thor's hammer.
So Loki keeps his head.
Yeah, Loki keeps his head. Loki, mind you, who started all this by assaulting Sif in the first place and shaving her head.
Right.
Yeah. So you hate Loki, but at the same time, if it wasn't for Loki, Thor wouldn't have this amazingly cool hammer that becomes his signature weapon throughout all the stories.
Right.
The same way Odin's spear Gungnir appears in every Odin story.
So his mouth is sewn closed.
Yeah.
For what length of time?
They don't say exactly. He's left, like the end of a sitcom, everybody laughs at the end. Yeah, Loki's left sitting there grumbling and, drumming his fingers on his chair, I'm sure, with his mouth sewn shut.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So happy ending then.
Happy ending, pretty much, yeah. It all started looking, wouldn't it be funny if there's tons of stories of Loki and Thor doing stuff. Loki and Thor go hunting. Loki and Thor, visit the land of the giants. And it usually ends up in some kind of wacky misadventure that Loki inevitably causes.
Right.
Which Thor has to fight his way out of. But you can definitely see what I meant about their relationship.
Absolutely.
The sibling rivalry going on between them. Yeah.
Thinking of, their escapades with the giant. That obviously didn't go so bad for Thor either.
Yeah. So that is a very famous story. It's generally known as the treasures of Asgard, or the treasures of the gods.
Is that actually the title of the book?
That's what they usually call it.
Okay.
I think Neil Gaiman called it the treasures of the gods, and Kevin Crowsley Holland called it the treasures of Asgard, but it's the same thing.
Okay. Actually, I have that one there.
Yep. Yeah. Neil Gaiman has a image of Mjolnir on the cover because that is the symbol of Norse myths and Thor in general. So what do you think of?
I love it. Love it all. I love a lot of what Marvel has done. I still am on the fence about the afterthoughts. I love Phoenix as a character.
Yeah.
And because I love her, I don't know if I love, again, just the it would be one thing if this was built in.
Yeah.
Then that could be really cool. So
some comic book retcons don't take.
Yeah.
And things just get glossed over as time passes. Yeah, for whatever reason in the Marvel comics, Sif has always had dark hair. She's a brunette. I don't know why. It's because they decided to make Thor blonde, so they couldn't make Sif blonde.
Right.
But so that version of the story didn't happen in Marvel Comics, clearly.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll be back next time with even more exciting stories from Norse mythology. All right, until then, I have been Ed.
Solitaire.
We'll see you next time. Until then, be safe.